Welcome to the Coffee House, where in the next hour, rape and a victim's right to know about emergency contraception. Lyme disease is just a tick away, how to avoid it, how to treat it. Plus, the Montgomery County Council breathes new life into the living wage. We reprise our conversation with Roger Wilkins about his latest book, Jefferson's Pillow, The Founding Fathers and the Dilemma of Black Patriotism. Also, singer-songwriter Steve Key bemoans Demon Java. We've got poetry by Laurie Tsang and the whimsy of Niccolo Whimsy. Hi, and welcome to the forum at the Coffee House. A sexual abuse or assault takes place every 2 minutes in the United States. And the trauma of these offenses is too often compounded, say rape and incest victim advocates, by the very hospitals that treat the victims. Compounded by a failure to provide information about the availability of emergency contraception. A Kaiser Family Foundation study reports that only 1 out of 9 women knows that emergency contraception even exists.
There are only 15 hospitals in the state of Maryland where a rape victim is guaranteed about finding out about emergency contraception. Emergency contraception is essentially a supercharged birth control pill that simply works by changing the woman's ovulation cycle and prevents a pregnancy. This is not the abortion pill that would actually terminate a pregnancy. It blocks a pregnancy from ever getting started.
3 out of 4 abuse and assault victims are under 18 years old, victimized by a family member or caregiver, says Donna Seeley, coordinator of the Sexual Abuse and Assault Center. Pregnancy by a family member, she says, opens up a Pandora's box, or how about a rape-induced pregnancy of someone with a developmental disability?
In 1990, my daughter Desiree, who has Down syndrome, was raped. At the time, she was 19 years old. She was taken to Prince George's Hospital to the Sexual Assault Center. She was interviewed, and there was an examination, and when it was determined that they had sufficient evidence, she was released and sent home. We were given no indication of that we needed to do anything, that she needed to see her doctor, other than the fact that within approximately 10 days she just needed to go back and have a checkup. The next day, a friend of mine from Baltimore, who happens to be a nurse, came to support the family, and she asked if when Desiree started taking the emergency contraceptive. I had absolutely no idea what she was talking about. She panicked, I panicked, and she said, well, they were supposed to have given you something, and you have to get it within a certain number of hours for it to be effective. I called my family physician, explained what had happened. He immediately called in a prescription, and I picked up the prescription at the local pharmacy. I sort of did a piece out of Terms of Endearment when Shirley MacLaine is trying to get her daughter the shot because she's dying of cancer. I made an incredible scene in the drugstore because they were taking their time, and I knew the clock was ticking, and I literally screamed at the pharmacist to give me the medication, raced home, and started giving it to Desiree. The doctor told me I needed to increase the first dosage that would have normally been a couple of pills, just to sort of make up for the time that was lost.
Emergency contraception is 99.5% effective if taken within 12 hours of a rape. It begins to lose its effectiveness after that and won't work at all after 72 hours. The hospital staff knew or should have known this, says Holland.
And they said that they weren't sure if it was necessary because for Desiree, and I only took that to mean because of her disability. I wasn't quite sure that I understood, but I asked them to clarify that, and they mentioned that, well, she has Down syndrome, and I immediately told them that doesn't mean she couldn't get pregnant. And then when I asked about the contraceptive, they said, well, I guess we forgot.
Desiree got her first pills 16 hours after the rape. Her mom and dad, who is now police chief in Hyattsville, were on pins and needles for months. Luckily, Desiree didn't get pregnant.
It would be even more difficult for me to explain to Desi what her options were if she had become pregnant. I have no idea how I would have done that because she loves children. I think that if that had happened, she would not have understood terminating a pregnancy. And so it's much more important to be very careful and attentive because the repercussions of something going wrong are much harder to explain and work with someone who has limited cognitive abilities.
Desiree was raped in October of 1990. Her assailant was tried and convicted in June of 1991 and sentenced in July to a total of 24 years in prison. What her mom terms Desiree's negligent treatment probably wouldn't be repeated today at Prince George's Hospital. Like Shady Grove Adventist, Prince George's is now a sexual assault forensic exam, or SAFE facility. SAFE hospitals are staffed with nurses skilled in collecting evidence of abuse and assault, and they're equipped with technology to detect injuries to the genitalia. All SAFE hospitals provide information about emergency contraception and dispense it. Shady Grove's Donna Seeley says that every victim who can become pregnant, when told about emergency contraception, chooses to take it. Shady Grove is the exception. There are only 15 SAFE hospitals in Maryland.
We have a number of stories from around the state where a girl or a woman has gone to a hospital, has not been treated with emergency contraception, and instances where she has then become pregnant and has had to face the decision about abortion after that. There is no reason that in this age, when we have the technology to prevent pregnancy, that a woman who is a victim of rape should be facing this decision. There is a hospital in Montgomery County, for instance, where officially they say they do give it out. They are not a rape center, and we had someone call, allegedly as the best friend of a young woman who had been raped, and was asked specifically about the provision of emergency contraception or the morning after pill. The person on the phone said, "Oh, honey, we don't give that out. Why don't you go to," and named another hospital. And that's unfortunate. Now, the good thing is that in this instance, she was given factual information. The unfortunate fact is that not every friend would know to ask about it before transporting a rape victim to the hospital. And once there, if she's not told about it, the clock is ticking.
Kagan has introduced legislation to mandate that abuse and assault victims are informed about emergency contraception.
This bill requires that every hospital at least give out unbiased oral and written medical information about how a rape victim can block a pregnancy. Other hospitals then can choose to provide more information than that. They can choose to dispense the drug or refer her to somewhere else where she can obtain it if she decides that she'd like to take this kind of medication.
Last year, Kagan introduced a similar but tougher bill, one that would have required hospitals to not only inform victims about emergency contraception, but to dispense it or refer the victim to a facility that does dispense it. But that bill, which was opposed by the Maryland Catholic Conference, languished in committee.
There's a perception that's inaccurate that Catholic health care forbids the provision of the morning after pill. This is not correct. The Catholic bishops do insist on compassionate care for rape victims, and in many instances do allow for the provision of the morning after pill. We modeled this bill based on what passed in Illinois that they helped draft and therefore did not oppose in Illinois. We were hoping, therefore, for the support in Maryland as well. Unfortunately, I'm not sure whether that's going to come to pass.
Still, Kagan is hopeful her legislation will pass the General Assembly this session. She's banking on a new and more sympathetic committee chairman, John Herson, election year pressures, and a less ambitious bill, one that lets the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene decide whether hospitals must provide victims with emergency contraception or refer them to a facility that does.
Hospitals in our state should be providing health care, to victims of rape and incest and not making their personal decisions for them. I think it's our hospital's obligation to educate the victims, provide them with enough information that they can make educated choices, and then provide them with the medicine if they so choose. At the very least, they really are obligated to provide them with medically accurate, factual information about something that could help them avoid a further trauma of a pregnancy after the trauma of a rape.
If that had been the case in 1990, although it would not have reduced the stress from the rape, it certainly could have helped for those 3 months that we were absolutely frantic about what was going to happen to Desiree. I would never, ever want anyone to have to go through that on top of dealing with a rape. And if they would be able to do that, I think a lot of not just people with disabilities, I think it's unconscionable that they could, quote, make a mistake and forget. And hopefully this would help them to remember every single time.
In Alaska, California, and Washington state, pharmacists are allowed to prescribe and dispense emergency contraception. The bill to give pharmacists that authority in Virginia was recently passed by the state Senate, but rejected by the House. I'm Mark Cohen, and this has been Coffee House Forum.
On a night like this, a full moon drifted between clouds, filling my dreams with light. I shifted in my sleep, backing up against your father's body, curving around me like a string of islands waking in a summer storm. The stillness afterwards, we lay together quietly, his long fingers stroking my belly, the way he would one day caress the head of his firstborn son. You were a big boy this year, old enough to run to the corner store by yourself for the forgotten eggs, a loaf of bread, a quart of milk, a 5-minute walk that became forever, and always the crimson stain spreading beneath your body, the broken eggs, the wasted milk. Father and I are without tongues tonight. Our eyes, brimming goblets we hold away from each other, careful not to spill a single precious drop. My body curls into a knot, aching fingers squeeze me too hard and not hard enough, but still sweet sap trickles through, grapes split open like an overripe plum. Father gathers me up, folding me against his hunger, and we push and pull at each other, flesh wailing hard against flesh, as if our desperate howling could bring you back into this world.
Hi, and welcome to In Sickness and in Health at the Coffee House. A stroll in the woods, an amble through a meadow, or even a walk in your garden could damage your health severely if a tiny little deer tick manages to climb onto you. These bugs may carry Lyme disease, that enters your body as the tick sucks your blood. The illness is unpleasant enough if your doctor manages to identify it in time, but many people don't know they have the disease until it has already caused damage within, sometimes leaving them debilitated for life. Here to talk about increasingly prevalent Lyme disease is Claire Spector, victim of the illness and also director of Elemedica Institute for Natural Medical Self-Care. Claire, welcome to the Coffee House. Lyme disease is the most common U.S. vector-borne disease, usually carried by the tick that goes on to deer and also mice. Yet it was only recognized 25 years ago, and it's going up and up. Maryland is one state where it's really becoming increasingly serious. Why is this?
Well, there's more deer population that's uncontrolled by predators. People are encroaching onto farmland as well, so they're moving into the deer's territory. And people are out of doors, and their cats and dogs are bringing the ticks in as well.
And could you perhaps tell us, please, about your story and your experience with Lyme?
Well, I live on a farm and was doing a medicinal plant farming center, and found myself fatigued to the point where over the course of a day I literally couldn't drive 0.2 of a mile to home, and very stiff neck, very stiff jaw, back, and then became disabled. I was in a wheelchair actually for a while, although I've fortunately have a natural health background and got good care.
Was this because you didn't recognize it, or it's just how the disease goes?
It really depends on a person's immunity. It depends on the virulence of the particular bacteria. And for many people, it really depends on whether their physician is able to diagnose them quickly enough.
You got over it after you got out of your wheelchair. Obviously, you seem totally better now.
Yes, I'm about, I'd say 90% recovered. But I'm very fortunate because I understand how to build immunity. I used a lot of complementary forms. I did a lot of acupuncture, craniosacral therapy, nutrition. And while I did do pharmaceutical medications for the prescribed course, I know how to detox from them as well. So with all of the other complementary protocols, I'm very lucky to be up and around and have my cognition. I literally couldn't drive. I couldn't do math for a period of time.
And this was in a space of just a couple of months?
I would say, yeah, within a couple of months.
Let's take a look at the tick, the tiny, weeny little creature that does this damage. It's, I guess, in its adult size, it's the size of a sesame seed, which is still very small, or it can be even smaller than that. And
it can be the size of a poppy seed in its nymph stage.
And you're meant to find this on your body?
Yeah, you want to look in places where there's elastic, things that bind to your body, groin, in the joints that bend.
Yeah.
And hairline, hat bands, between your fingers and toes.
How does it get onto us?
It's a heat seeker. It likes warm-blooded hosts, and so it can either drop out of a tree, it can drop out of a barn, it can come out of the grass, it can come in with your cat or dog.
Yeah.
And you can into your bed if you permit your pets to sleep with you as well.
So if you went for a walk in the woods, say around here, we have plenty of woods, beside the creek, are you in danger there? Anywhere where deer might go, or even?
Well, you want to be conscious, and I think the most important thing is that you develop a routine that when you come in, you shower, you use a washcloth, you run your hands very gently across your body, looking for even the smallest raised surface, because they are so tiny. You can, people who have hair, being wet and being able to comb through, you have a very high likelihood of being able to find it, and that's very important, because if you can find it quickly before it has dug in, where many times you will not feel the bite, you're almost anesthetized at the site, then you are in much better shape. If you can collect the tick by putting a pair of tweezers very close to the skin and just pulling it directly out, collect it into a small jar and have it tested. There are a number of places that you can have it competently tested. Genetic testing is even probably the best. And then you can have yourself tested in the event that you start to manifest
symptoms.
Yes,
Yeah, we'll
correct.
get to those in a moment. If your pet has it, pets can get it too, right?
Yes,
And,
absolutely.
can be seriously ill with it. And is it May to July when you have to be most careful, or really?
It really depends. But in temperate areas that have temperature ranges between 15 and 95 degrees Fahrenheit, it can be prevalent. And we've had weird weather patterns so that we never really get to the very high end or low end, and therefore they can proliferate throughout the. I've been finding them on cats throughout the season, even if they have frontline on it, by the way.
Which is an insecticide or protection that you can get.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go to how you would discover if your body shows symptoms, the early symptoms. Say you got bitten 3 days, it can come as soon as 3 days after, right? Or
2 or 3 days. Some
up
people
to a
react
month.
actually to the bite.
Oh, okay.
And so you might see an insect bite or then potentially a bullseye, although in children, a number of clinicians say that they don't see a rash in more than 10% of children. And it may be that the parents miss it or that it just doesn't manifest. And even in adults, 30 to 40% of the people who are infected don't get it. You're looking for a stiff neck, a stiff jaw, a headache. It can be almost like a flu, can be fever in the early stages. But a very, very serious stiff neck to the point where you cannot turn your neck is a really good sign. Some people will miss all of that. They'll chalk it up to the flu, and they won't have found a bite, or a rash.
Right.
That's where.
And then if you don't treat it in time, or even sometimes when you do, what are the problems with that? It can
Well, the bacteria, the Borrelia burgdorferi, is a rather interesting creature. It can change forms. And apparently, depending on which tissue, the classical form is the spirochete, which is a curly bacteria that kind of coils itself up and then propels itself, not just through the bloodstream, but through the tissue. It can go through the various body tissues. And within 12 hours of infection, it can get into the brain, very deep tissues into the body. And so it can also change its form, and it's a cell wall deficient form, or a cystic form. And some clinicians are saying that the different forms require different kinds of medication. If there's no cell wall, the human immune system cannot detect it, and the antibiotics that are cued to binding to those receptors.
So your symptoms will be different too.
Yes, exactly. And the co-infections too. Some of the ticks will carry other infections like Ehrlichia or Babesia, which are the Babesia is like a malarial parasite, and the Ehrlichia is more like a rickettsial, and you have to resolve that if you can be tested for it.
What happens, how do you get rid of these things once they're really embedded in your system?
Well,
what are some of the misdiagnoses too that people are told they have?
Full range, everything from, in some cases, MS, lupus.
Has multiple sclerosis, lupus.
Yes, exactly. Because of the cognitive problems, some people are diagnosed with dementia or Alzheimer's disease, even at a fairly young age. Depression, oftentimes. Learning disabilities where all of a sudden you can't focus and you have no motivation. So it's
chronic fatigue.
Chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia, very intense pain, neurological pain, or neurological deficit, fine motor skill deficit. You find yourself bumping into things or forgetting things or being
arthritis.
confused.
All of that,
Major joint arthritis.
So how do you tackle, these obviously embedded symptoms?
Well, if you're aware of and there is a great deal of information now available, lymenet.org. There are a number of nonprofit organizations that have been founded.
And you teach yourself about
Yes, I do.
Lyme,
I teach a class called Well Beyond Lyme.
So what are the broad approaches? Medicine?
Pharmaceutical medicine, appropriately diagnosed critter, and then appropriate medication, anti-inflammatory support, Very important magnesium and potassium levels for some reason really seem to go down, and therefore you can have heart symptoms as well as apparently psychiatric symptoms, either explosive temper.
Diet is very
Diet is very important in terms of keeping the nutritional intakes up and to keep the inflammation down.
And just finally, because we're running out of time here, there was a vaccine, but just last week I read that it's been suspended.
No, there are some homeotherapeutic approaches, and that's what I used really to overcome it, because I still had considerable symptoms after the antibiotics. So the Celotec, homeopathic, it's homeotherapeutic. It's more of a nutrition form that educates the immune system.
Well, I guess we really should check carefully we don't have this on us after going outside. It's hard to deal with afterwards.
Important.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
A big thank you to Claire Spector for joining me in the coffee house to talk about the serious disease of Lyme and how we can tackle it. I'm Cathy Kristiansen, and this has been In Sickness and in Health.
And the problem is there's an increasing amount of poverty in Montgomery County.
Yeah.
We've got almost a quarter of our school children that are eligible for free lunches in the schools because their parents make less than the federal eligibility level for food stamps. So we have a large number of students in the schools, and it's increasing. It's not decreasing in these good economic times. And so what we're doing now is not sufficient.
But how did we come to the $10.44 an hour as the living wage, Tom? What is that based on?
Well, it's based on a very basic idea that people who are working full-time on county tax dollars, either working for a county contractor or working for a business that's getting a significant subsidy from the county, should be able to feed their families. And if you're working for less than $10.44 an hour, you qualify for food stamps, which obviously means you don't make enough to feed your families. So we wanted to put...
Is that a family of four, or is that...
Family of four, right.
And
But I think you also have to consider the cost of living in Montgomery County, that this is not the cheapest place in which to live. And there's a strong need for workers at all levels here in the county. And so that problem of the need for workers and the ability to work and to provide some of the basic necessities is a growing problem in the community, and we need to address that.
Right. Some of the opponents made a lot that the proposed living wage was twice the minimum wage, but that assumes that the minimum wage is a meaningful wage, which it isn't. The minimum wage is $5.15 an hour. That's $41 a day before taxes. You can't live anywhere in the country hardly on that. Certainly, you can't live in Montgomery County on that. We are paying our school superintendent 25% more here than he was making in North Carolina, basically to keep his standard of living level. What might be a tolerable wage somewhere else is still not necessarily going to be enough here. And so we need to look at the cost of living here.
There is concern, and I hear this from people who are otherwise sympathetic to the living wage idea, that it would be unilateral disarmament for Montgomery County to do this when surrounded by Prince George's County or Fairfax County or other counties that don't do it, that are only subject to a $5.15 an hour wage, and that it will engender a migration of business activity out of the county and jobs. How do you respond to that?
Well, let me start with that,
Sure.
and then turn to Tom and Ike. No one is forcing companies or organizations to take county funds. This would only have applied to organizations that choose to accept county contracts or county economic incentives. So if you don't want county tax dollars, you would have been unaffected by this legislation.
Right. And as you said earlier, it's nearly 40 jurisdictions now that have passed living wage legislation. And there's just no sense in speculating. The facts are that in all of those jurisdictions, in many of the biggest cities in the country, nobody's ever been able to point to a restaurant or a parking garage or a hotel that's changed jurisdictions because of the passage of a living wage ordinance. It just simply doesn't happen.
Hey, it don't take much, just a corner in a quiet cafe. If people want to listen, I always got time to play. I never made much money, but I sure made a lot of friends. Right here, right now, I'm feeling like singing again. Hey, if you got the rooms, I got the tunes. If you got the place, I'll open my case. I'll sing you some songs I wrote and some I borrowed. I'll sell you some you can sing tomorrow. You got the rooms, hey, I got the tunes. Well, I played Gertie's Folk City and the Philly Folk Festival too. I played to hundreds of people and sometimes only a few. Some concert halls, a lot of church basements and bars. And in the homes of people who treated me like some kind of star. Hey, if you got the room, I got the tune. You got the place, I'll open my case. I'll sing you some songs I wrote and some I borrowed. I'll sell you some you can sing tomorrow. You got the room, I got the tune. I'll call it a house concert if that's where the show's gonna be. Ask your priest or pastor to give you some space for free. Find a restaurant with a banquet room upstairs. Then drop me a line and in no time you know I'm gonna be there. If you got the rooms, I sure got the tunes. You got the place, I'll open my case. And I'll play you some songs I wrote and some I borrowed. I'll sell you some you can sing tomorrow. If you got the room, yeah, I got the tune. Yeah, you got the room, I got the tune.
Well, Steve, welcome to Musical Traditions. Good to see you.
Hey, Dave.
And we go back a ways.
We go back.
But that tune, that's a brand new tune. That's your life, isn't it, these days?
Yeah, kinda.
That's the life of setting up coffee houses and open mics?
Yeah, I have gone back to the future. I'm doing some shows in some new spaces, but it's an old idea, just putting on a folk show in a church hall.
Yeah.
You know
how many of those?
That.
Yeah, I do a little bit of that myself. How many of those are you doing right now
in a
given week? Yeah.
You're doing about 3 or 4 months right now. Unitarian Church in Bethesda, the River Road Unitarian Church.
That old rugged question mark.
And UU Church in Rockville. The Unitarians, they like folk singers.
That's right.
But there's also an Episcopal church down in Alexandria we've been doing a series at. And, people down there like the music too, so keep it going.
And let's see, the one in Bethesda is known as Red Rover?
Red Rover, because it's the River Road Church, and I don't know, I'm kind of crazy. I started saying River Road, Red Rover, Red Rover.
That little game we used to play as kids. Yeah. Well, this is wonderful. You were out of the area for a while, and now you're back.
I was in the Witness Protection Program.
Right. You'd never be discovered where you were.
Yeah, I was a songwriter in Nashville. It was easy to kind of lose yourself.
That's exactly right. Yeah. Everybody's. But let's see. When you came to the D.C. area, that's obviously when we first met, and that was about 1990.
Something or other. Oh, even before then, I came here as a visitor about 17 years ago.
Yeah.
A friend of mine was getting married down in Woodbridge, and we came up just to hang out as tourists in the big city. Somehow we heard about this open mic that was happening on Sunday nights at Gallagher's Pub on Connecticut Avenue, and Mary Chapin Carpenter hosting that one, and that was my introduction to D.C. folk, all the people hanging out there. It was a great crowd. And so I started coming back.
You actually moved here in...
90 was about when we moved here, yeah.
And then you moved away in what year?
95. We're kind of on the 5-year plan. Every 5 years we have to move, no matter where it is.
So you moved back about, what, 2 years ago?
Getting on that, yeah.
Yeah, and it's great to have you back on the local scene.
Thanks. Thanks.
And you're doing your thing as usual. You're writing cool songs, and really, you're a conduit for bringing new people up and say, hey, have you heard so and so? Have you heard? You know, it's not just about you, which is
conduit. Well, that's a big word. I don't use words.
That's a cool
like
word.
that.
It's not that many letters.
Sounds like a congressman or something.
No. He didn't win this year. All right. Well, let's see. Let me guess. The name of that first song was "Rooms and Tunes."
Have you got the rooms? Yeah, something
like
that.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
And what are you going to take us out with?
Well, I said in that song that sometimes I do songs I wrote and sometimes some I borrowed. I thought I'd play a tune by a buddy of mine up in Boston named David Goldfinger.
Okay. Well, take us home.
All right. This is the coffee house, isn't it?
Now, the old-timers told me when I first hit the scene, Steve, the folk circuit will treat you fine if you gotta stay off that evil bean. The aroma's gonna tempt you like the flower tempt the bee. Hey, it's hard to turn it down when churches give it to you free. Demon job. How many lives have you ruined? Oh, demon job, a demon job. Here's one man you just can't do him. Well, it starts with a little pick-me-up, the local corner store. When you crash, you'll throw your cash away on just one more. Next, you'll do espresso. That's the way it always goes. Won't be long before you're packing coffee up your nose. Oh, demon Java. How many lives have you ruined? Mine for sure. Oh, demon Java, demon Java. I can smell that trouble brewing, yeah. Well, they ship it in from Colombia, Zimbabwe, and Brazil. They pack it deep in cocaine so the dogs can't catch the smell. Don't let your minds be misled by reports from the FDA. America's on drugs, but Demon Java leads the way. This buddy of mine came home last night. Wife beat him half to death. All because he had that Demon Java on his breath. She threw his stuff out on the street. She said, I'm gonna see your butt in court. Oh, he didn't know his habit could be grounds for divorce. Demon Java. How many lives have you ruined? Hey, Demon Java, Demon Java. Here's one man you just can't do it. Demon Java.
Welcome to Writer's Block. The words of Thomas Jefferson are imprinted on the American psyche. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. But Jefferson's words were hypocritical. He did not heed these truths, did not treat all men in an equal fashion. He spoke of liberty and freedom and democracy, even as he remained a slave owner to his dying day. In his new book, Jefferson's Pillow, The Founding Fathers and the Dilemma of Black Patriotism, Roger Wilkins examines Jefferson as well as George Washington, James Madison, and George Mason. He reveals that while these men publicly castigated the system of slavery, privately they enjoyed the lifestyle it provided them. Roger Wilkins is professor of history at George Mason University. He has been a recipient of the Pulitzer Prize. He was Assistant Attorney General during the Johnson administration and an activist in the Civil Rights Movement. His previous work includes an autobiography entitled A Man's Life. In 2001, he became a member of the school board of the District of Columbia, and he lives in Washington, D.C. Welcome to the Coffee House.
It's a pleasure to be here, Lisa.
So this is called Jefferson's Pillow because?
Jefferson wrote in his autobiography that his first memory was of being carried by a slave riding on horseback on a pillow from one of his family plantations to another. And it struck me that this was the perfect metaphor
Yes.
for what I wanted to say about the revolution, which was that America could not have been what it was at the time of the revolution but for the power and the work and the production of the slaves. And the slave-owning founding fathers could not have been the people they were without having been buoyed up
Yes, the cushion.
by the slaves. And they led lives that were cushioned by slavery. So that the idea of the revolution as an all-white enterprise led by guiltless and wonderful white men is wrong.
Right.
And so I thought the pillow was
Very appropriate.
A lot of people think it's about Sally Hemings, but it's not.
It's not, right,
No.
right. Although you do mention her.
I do.
But you talk about all four of these men in terms of their sort of entitlement and their accomplishments. You're very thorough, but with the backdrop of their...
Well, they were products of their culture and their class. You couldn't be who they were in that generation in Virginia and be somebody who counted and not own slaves.
Right.
It was a one-crop economy. That crop was tobacco. It required lots of slaves. And in order to be a member of the aristocracy, the political aristocracy, you had to be a member of the landed gentry. So that if any of these men had attempted to lead slaveless lives, they might be remembered as secular saints, as minor oddities, but they would not have been the massive public figures that have come down to us in history.
And you break down how, you know, the work that they all did in terms of being the founding fathers and the Declaration of Independence, you know. You talk about an upside-down Bill of Rights for slaves.
Well, Mason wrote the Virginia Declaration of Rights on which the Bill of Rights is patterned, and he championed the Bill of Rights and really did most of the politics that forced Madison to create the Bill of Rights and get it into the Constitution. Well, what do these guys want? In the First Amendment, the right to assemble, the right to go to Washington and petition for grievances, freedom of speech, and freedom to do politics. That was everything that the slave codes denied to the blacks. They couldn't assemble. They obviously couldn't do politics. They couldn't go anywhere to petition for grievances. They had no freedom of speech. These men led a revolution crying toward England, "We will not be slaves."
At the same time.
But the slaves that they owned gave flesh to their fears. And so they knew what unfreedom was because they had imposed unfreedom in this upside-down Bill of Rights on the slaves. So they knew what it took really to be free, and that's one of the ways that they were able to fashion such a wonderful document as the Bill of Rights.
And the irony of fighting for freedom and democracy at the same time not even acknowledged.
They knew these were not immoral men. They were morally deformed by their culture.
Right.
But they were not morally blind. They knew slavery was wrong. They knew slaves were people. They knew slaves hurt when you hit them. They knew it was wrong to sell people away from their families. They knew that selling somebody down to the West Indies when they'd never have a chance to see their families was horrible. And they knew that slavery degraded them. They said so. Every master of slaves is a born tyrant. Mason said that. But they couldn't figure out, none of those 4 men ever lived a slaveless day in his life.
Wow.
Washington, really became anti-slavery at the end of his life, and he wrote a will freeing his slaves. Madison wanted to, but realized when he tried that it would bankrupt his wife and leave her penniless. Mason made the most powerful anti-slavery statements, but he had lots of kids. And when he died, he willed his slaves to his children just the way he willed them his cattle and his furniture. And Jefferson was really quite a self-indulgent guy, and he got debts from all kinds of places, but part of his debt was buying a lot of stuff from England when he was already France when he was deeply in debt. So his only wealth was his slaves, and he really didn't free any other than some named Hemmings.
You call him the most hypocritical, don't you?
Well, yeah, there is a streak of. I don't think he wouldn't be a good friend. He was not loyal to President Washington when Washington needed him. He did politics in a very sly way. He was emotional and said foolish things, but he also wrote some of the enduring beliefs.
Yes, and beautifully written.
And he hated, he just wrote miscegenation was horrible, the worst thing that could be. And yet here was Sally Hemings having all these babies. Now, even if the babies weren't his, the miscegenation that was obviously going on his plantation was made possible by the fact that he owned this woman and he permitted it to occur, whether it was with his brother, his uncle, his nephews, I think the probability is it was Jefferson. So, but it's pretty hypocritical to do that. And yet, all of these men, the end result of what they did was to create a country in which I and others of my generation were able to use the rights that they established and the ideals that they put into our culture to create a better country, to enlarge freedom for blacks, for Hispanics, for Native Americans, for gays, everybody, women. And that's why I say I'm a patriot, because, first of all, I'm an American. I like baseball and B.B. King and, you know, and we were talking before, my daughter loves John Coltrane. And
those are American
Those
figures.
are American things, that's right. And all the touchstones of my life are American. And I didn't do, and Julian Bond didn't do, and Thurgood Marshall didn't do the things that we did in our lifetimes just for black people. We did it because we were imbued with American values, and we said, we got to have them here. We've got to live them, and everybody's got to have a share.
Right.
Well, you can't do that. You can't take advantage of that and not look back at these guys and say, boy, they really left us something. Flawed as they were. And people don't have to be all one way, you know?
Well, and you juxtapose their stories with your own and your own families. We just have a couple minutes left, but you talk about your ancestry, you talk about the slaves in your own family, and you talk about a trip to Ghana. Could you just mention a little bit about that?
Well, somebody called me in a talk show and said, you had those slaves in your family and you got that old slave name. Why do you keep that old slave name? And I said, it might have been a slave name when they put it on, my great-grandfather, but as a sharecropper with honor and dignity, he gave that name his stamp, and then my grandfather gave it his stamp, and then my uncle and my daddy and my aunt, they gave it their stamp, and this is our name. It's no slave name. This is a proud black family's name. I went to Ghana and I saw people who looked like me, and I was very moved. It was unlike any, I've been in Africa lots, but it was the first place that I'd really seen people who looked like cousins.
Yes.
And then I went to the Cape Coast Castle, the dock from which they sold, one of them, to which they sold slaves. I went down in a dungeon. It was awful, where they just kept them packed in for a long time. And then out of this door of no return, we extruded them to that horrible trip across the Atlantic Ocean, where so many died. And I just almost physically staggered under the weight of the knowledge that I was probably where some of my ancestors left on that horrible trip. But I realized as I stood there and I looked at the curve of the ocean that toward the Americas, that the centuries had made me an American. That though I loved my Ghanaian ancestors and I revered them, that my American slave ancestors had poured their toil and blood into this soil. And they had made it mine, and nobody on this earth could take it away from me.
And that's the beauty of the juxtaposition, actually, is that the first book, the first half is the Founding Fathers, the second half is your family, this American story, and how they're related, that they're joined together.
Right,
So.
and it, you know, Miles Davis is not a Ghanaian.
Right. Thank you, Roger.
You're welcome.
Many thanks to Roger Wilkins for rushing back from his vacation to be with us for the show. Again, his new book is Under Jefferson's Pillow, The Founding Fathers and the Dilemma of Black Patriotism. I'm Lisa Page, and this has been Writer's Block. Thank you.
Nice to greet you, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Coffee House. My name is Nicolo. I assume you all know yours. This is my partner, the lovely and charming Queen of Whimsy. Together, we are Nicolo Whimsy, which makes it easy for me to remember our name. We find this show is best appreciated with a large group of people in your living room screaming and yelling. So turn up the volume on your TV, and we'll do a crowd gathering technique. Here it is. Come one, come all to the Nicolo Show, happening in your living room. Move your feet, your body will follow. Short people up front, 3 belly dancers in 2 costumes. Here we go, time for your major applause point. Hit it. Well done, and thank you, Queenie Whimsy, for controlling the air traffic in the area. 1 trumpet sound. 2 trumpet sounds. And a moose fart. 2 trumpet sounds and a moose fart. That can mean only one thing. It's showtime. And time for me to play my favorite musical instrument and everybody's favorite choice for easy listening, the accordion. While the Queen of Whimsy accompanies me with her anti-gravity antics, featuring the magical ball, and umbrella, oh look, here come some audience members. She caught it. Thank you, audience member. Well done, Queen of Whimsy. The Queen of Whimsy is a goddess among women. She told me to say that. That's because the Queen of Whimsy doesn't talk much. Ladies and gentlemen, although the accordion might seem to you to be a difficult instrument to play, and even more difficult to listen to, the trombone is even harder. The trombone requires so many years of practice, hard work, mental suffering, physical anguish, and sheer outright horror, that the Queen of Whimsy has wisely decided not to play the trombone. Instead, she will be playing the musical saw, an ancient instrument never before heard on Coffee House. She will be strumming on the saw with the violin bow, so listen carefully. And children, if you're watching at home and you want to borrow your parents' violin bows to strum upon the saw, by all means, go for it. You have our permission. We're going to tune up now for about a half an hour. is a little sharp. Maestro, musica! At this point during the song, most of the people watching the show jump off of their couches and start waltzing around in the living room uncontrollably. Good! I'll do it too. Good day, me lord. Nice to greet thee, me lady. What's up? The Queen of Whimsy used to play the drill, but that was boring. Well, wouldn't life be boring if we all had the same sense of humor? Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching this portion of the Niccolo Whimsy Show. We'll be back with another segment full of juggling and old Yipsy jokes. Remember, if you shoot for the moon and miss, you're still among the stars. Thank you for watching Coffee House. We'll see ya.
That's it for this time. See you next month in the Coffee House.
A message from the Steel Recycling Institute, the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, and this station. Call 1-800-YES-1-CAN.
Tiger mosquitoes make it tough to enjoy your own backyard. A major pest in Maryland, this mosquito is not easily controlled. Active throughout the day, the Asian tiger lays its eggs in breeding areas found in most backyards. Stagnant water and clogged gutters, old tires, cans and buckets, even flower pots. Eliminate their breeding grounds and reduce the number of tigers in your backyard. A public service message of the Maryland Department of Agriculture.
You'd never know it, but nearly half of today's military are National Guard and reservists. However, they can't answer our nation's call without their employer's support. If you're an employer, visit esgr.org and find out how to do your part.